everyone. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today with our sponsor, Talia Rivera, who had a brilliant idea for a new dyeing experiment. Talia was making some homemade lace weight blanks on a crank knitting machine, and to deal with the massive volume of blank coming out of the bottom of the machine and twisting, she rolled it up into a donut-like shape. Inspiration struck, and she wondered what would happen if you were to go and dye this donut of a blank. What kind of effects would you see on the yarn? I will show you in a moment what this donut looks like because I obviously have to start making the blanks. But I wanted to add my own spin onto this project. For this video, I'm not just going to make one double-stranded knit blank, I'm going to make two. The larger loops and threads knitting machine is probably my favorite of all the hand crank knitting machines that I have. But this one has about double the stitches, and so it makes a much wider tube, which would therefore make a wider donut than the Singer knitting machine in pink. Another reason why I'm making two is that I'm winding a double-stranded knit blank out of Knit Picks Hawthorne yarn. This yarn is 80% superwash fine Highland wool, 20% polyamide. Right here I have two yarn cakes, and each are just over 101 grams. I am going to use one strand from each cake, wind one blank until I am just over 50 grams, and then I'm going to use what's left over and wind a second blank on the other knitting machine. This is a really easy way for me to create these double-stranded blanks without having potential waste as I try to divide one skein equally. Talia, I am so excited to do this project, and thank you so much for coming up with this awesome idea. When winding these blanks by hand, the tubes can get pretty long and they can get very twisted, which sort of affects the overall tension. But Talia had a really good solution. She wound her blank into sort of a donut just by basically like rolling up your hem down the length. And this is the construction that we are going to try to dye today. Unfortunately, I had some mishaps towards the end of this blank, as can happen with these Singer knitting machines. So instead of rolling it starting at the cast on end, once I remove this from the machine, I'm going to start rolling it from the cast off edge, sort of to keep this more towards the interior. That way, since this is the area that will probably see the least amount of dye, it'll be less affected. At least in theory. See, ball 1 is about 50.3, and ball 2 is also at 50.3. So I'm now going to snip the yarn and finish off the blank. Now, hand crank knitting machines are far from perfect, and I'm just going to snip that. They're far from perfect because, you know, they're toys made for kids, but I do have some videos on the channel about how to use them to make your own blanks. There we go. I'm going to wind another blank on my loops and threads knitting machine, which should give us a blank about twice as wide with the remaining yarn. But let's start making our donut. This is the edge that just came off the knitting machine with our little mistakes. The nice thing about making homemade blanks is that mistakes don't matter a huge amount because you're going to unravel it. But if you're hoping for some texture from the way that, you know, your blank is raveled and how it's going to unravel, then that is just something to consider. But I am just winding, and it's definitely getting a bit tighter and tighter as I go. So there will absolutely be some good resist in here. I'm actually really curious because, like, yes, there's more color on the outside, but I don't think it's going to be quite a smooth gradient. But I think that there could be like a like a sort of almost like a stripey type gradient. Let's see if we can get, oof. We are so close, guys. There's not much left. I wonder if, rather than going from the inside, I should just go over like this. Oh, but now I need to get this inserted through. So maybe that's not the way to do it. Maybe it's to continue cuffing it is the way to do this. Okay, I think maybe like one more. All right, it's looking very apple-y versus a donut. And then we have this, this little tail. I wonder if, can I get it to do it one more time? Yes. There we go. We have our blank. And the nice thing here is that it won't unravel because the end that would unravel is in the inside. You know, this donut is very reminiscent of a tightly wound yarn cake. But the difference here is that with the yarn cake, you have access to the center of the ball from the outside. So you know that there will at least be some color going all the way to the middle. Here, the middle of the yarn is in the inside of this little donut apple guy. I'm really excited to take a look to make the wider blank, because I think that that donut will be flatter and maybe have, well, it'll definitely have more surface area. But I'm gonna go make that now. I have a bunch of videos on how to make your own blanks with these home crank knitting machines, and you should really check them out. I'll have links in the video description and the iCard. I think that you can tell with this one that I really wanted to donut as you go. However, I do want to do the same thing I did with the first one and leave the cast off edge, the bind off edge, which I keep loose for easy unraveling, on the inside. With the Singer knitting machine, I found that it is really important to keep your tension really loose while you're winding it. But with the loops and threads machine, I found sort of the opposite. You really need to make sure your tension is a tiny bit tighter, or else you end up with some drop stitches. And as I'm rolling this donut, this is a lot easier for me to roll up. You can see I'm not struggling. It feels overall a lot looser. I did have some errors in some parts of this, but I think that that is okay, because again, it's all gonna get unraveled anyway. But here we have our second donut. Looking at these two donuts is really bringing me back to a long time ago ChemKnits dyeing experiment, where I looked at a tightly wound cake of yarn versus a loosely wound cake of yarn to see how they picked up color. Now, since these are done with superwash yarn, I know a lot of the dye is going to strike to the outside, and whether or not we get color all the way to the center remains to be seen. I think it could be worth trying this out with a non-superwash yarn at one point. It's very possible we're going to get very little color penetration, but my hypothesis is that we're going to get more color penetration on this cake that is a lot looser. I mean, I can easily open it up to the center than we are on this one, where it's a lot more of a struggle to open it up. Before we start dyeing this yarn, I do want to pre-wet it, at least pre-saturate it. So that way, once we add it to our dye bath, they will sink down. So you can see that I am sort of squishing them now. I might choose to squish them in the dye bath so we can try to get some color towards the center, so we can try to soak some more water in there. But this should help put things in. I think you could get really cool effects if you were to add it dry as well, but I think that this will help with our initial plan. In my dedicated dye steam pan, I have 16 cups of water plus 8 more on standby. And today the dye that we are going to mix is from the Wilton Colorite Performance Color System. I decided to go with food coloring today because I wanted to create some colors that will break. And I know that there are commercial acid dyes that will break, but I just don't have the experience with them yet. I'm going to mix a purpley color that I used in the November ChemKnits dye-along. I use this color on 100 grams of yarn, and I'm going to do 1.5 times that since I've got 200 grams of yarn here. We'll see. I'm going to start with 39 drops of blue. 7, 38, 39. Now we are going to do 6 drops of pink. 12 drops of red. 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12. Okay, maybe I've not been super fair to AmeriColor because that one was a bit harder to drop out. But I think red is one of the colors that I do use the least out of all of them. Finally, I want to add 1 drop of the base black. Whoa, that was so cool looking. Oh, I wish that I had someone else here filming as I was dropping these food coloring drops because this just looked so cool. But anyway, now I want to stir this up. The thing with this system is that these colors do have these very thick, viscous drops. And it's possible that by adding it directly to the pan, there will be some left on the bottom. So that's just something that I want to keep in mind before we prepare to add the yarn. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and just mix this up as well as I can. I went ahead and added 8 more cups of water. So we're now at 24 cups of water, no vinegar. And you can see we've got this beautiful purpley shade. Let's also just take a little dip. And so it's looking really blue. But we know that those purples are in there, and now you can see that we're starting to see that breaking. I'm going to very gently squeeze out. They're still coming with some water in them, the donuts, before coming and placing them in. Our dye bath is completely cool. It is completely cool, and I'm going to want to add some more water. I chose to add the tighter donut first because that one will likely need a little more contact with all of our dye. And yes, I am going to kind of squish it down. That one doesn't really need help. This one might need a little help from time to time. All right, now I'm going to turn on the heat and bring this up to a very low simmer. It's going to take a long time. There is a lot of dye in here, very small amount of surface area, but my hope is that, you know, some of this will penetrate towards the center, and we might see some really cool color breaking. There's a tiny bit of movement in the water and things are starting to heat up, but we can see sort of like a cool gradient thing happening up there. I do want to sort of add some reds on top of it, mainly because I know the other one is more covered, but you know, I know some of you will be mad that I did that, but you know, I'm trying to have like a nice comparison here, and I don't think I can bring the water level up too much higher in here. I mean, clearly we still got reds, we've still got everything left in there. But we also, I mean, mainly that's because we haven't added any vinegar at all yet. Our heat is still on high. And yeah, I'll come back in a couple minutes. Now that there is some movement on the surface, I am going to reduce the heat to low. We don't need it to be too hot. And I'm still seeing, I think, a hint of purple in there, but it is looking maybe a bit more blue than it was before. Sort of again splashing over the top just to give it's some access, and plus by splashing it over the top, this is going to potentially allow some dye to get in the center. I'm going to start adding vinegar slowly, and by slowly I mean that I'm going to start with a 1/4 cup. A 1/4 cup is equivalent to 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. But don't forget, we have 32 cups of water in here. So this is equivalent to 1 tablespoon and 8 cups of water, which is a proportion that I use a lot for dip dyeing. I know I'm going to need to update the amount of vinegar a lot, but this concentration is enough to help some of these reds start to bind as I splash over the top, also to help get some vinegar in there, and same thing over here. We have a large volume of water. This is probably one of the biggest volumes of water I have used in almost any video, but I'm really excited to see sort of what happens. I'm gonna go ahead and let this sit for 15 minutes. I do want to take a second and talk about why I decided to go with purple again. Purple happens to be my favorite color, and time again with these different dyeing experiments, I lean towards doing a purple color. And the big reason for that is that you get the most dramatic color breaking with purples. Any situation where you have red 3, maybe some red 40, and some blue number 1, you're gonna see colors break. The reds typically strike first, and then the blues tend to follow. Now, what we're gonna see here, whether or not we're just gonna see the purple, it's all gonna bind to the outside, I can't say 100% for sure. But we do know that we are gonna get some color, and so if a color is going to break, this one will. So anyway, when the timer goes off, I'll come back. Let's check in. I did this once while those 15 minutes were going, but I sort of picked up the bottom to let, you know, some things travel beneath it. But I had not sort of scooped over it yet. And I will say, there might still be a hint of red in here, but maybe we're also looking bluer. I am starting to see a bit of a red halo around the outside. Maybe I'm seeing a little red halo on the surface too. But check out those sides. Like, what's cool is that, oh yeah, you can see that there is some like pigment variation along the outside of this, which is just so cool. Ooh, wow. Yeah, you can see there's red on the back of my spoon. Maybe on the front of it too. I'm gonna go wash this. But yeah, I think now I do want to add some more vinegar. I'm going to add another 1/4 cup, which is now the total vinegar concentration is 8 tablespoons of vinegar and 32 cups of water. So that is equivalent of 2 per 8, which is a concentration I use most often when dyeing yarn. So at this stage, I'm going to let this sit under this medium heat, I think for an hour. I'm going to let it sit. Occasionally I might come and splash some water over things, which again is just sort of also helping to deliver some acid. But you know, we'll come back in an hour. I'm expecting there's still going to be a lot of color in here, but we'll be back. After an hour, we have definitely seen a change in the color. There's a lot of blues left behind, which is not a surprise. Blues take longer to absorb to the yarn, and at some point there's a limit to how much dye each spot of yarn can take. And so if we were to have these unraveled right now, all this dye would shoop, sort of quickly go into the yarn. But it's not as easy for it to get to the center and get there and bind. I am going to press it a little bit, maybe it'll soak some of this blue in towards the center. No idea if that'll work or not, but it definitely could. But again, you can just, I can feel that there is much more resist in this tightly wound one versus the looser one. I get a lot of questions both in the comments of these videos and in the ChemKnits Lab Facebook group of people who are dyeing yarn and they're like, man, I just can't get that blue to exhaust. Well, there's a lot that could be going on. But one of the most frequent things is either there's way too much dye around and not enough surface area for these colors to bind. B, you don't have a high enough vinegar. And then C, you just need to wait longer. It's possible that not all of this will absorb. This is a lot of color. And I know I'm adding another 1/4 cup of vinegar here. I know, actually, let's add one more. So that's a total of 1/2 cup of water, 1/2 cup of white vinegar added. One thing you can do that might help with yarn bleeding, if you've got some color in here that just won't exhaust, use what I like to call a yarn mop. Take a fresh skein of yarn, add it into the pan, and that'll help soak up all this residual color. And leaving it in the pan for a bit is a great way to sort of then, while your mop is soaking up that extra dye, sort of like a color catcher in the laundry, then it'll make the rinsing of those easier. However, I just added a lot more vinegar and I am comfortable letting this sit. We're still heating, we're below a simmer, and just giving it a little more time. The color looks a lot brighter looking at the whole pan, but if you just look at it on the spoon, it is fairly dilute and really not as dark as it looks. Now, I normally do not have this volume of water or anywhere close to it, but I do think that maybe with a little more time, we might be able to get some more of this to absorb. You've definitely seen me use a similar amount of dye on 100 grams, I mean proportionally, and it's absorbed way, way, way faster. So the surface area definitely is a huge component. I just set a timer for 30 minutes. We're gonna give this 30 more minutes of heat, and then we'll come and turn off the heat and probably let this cool off in the dye bath. Talia, I am so excited to open these up. It's gonna be so, so hard to wait for them to cool completely. After 30 minutes, maybe some more exhausted. There's definitely still some color in there, but if I found that, I just did this, but if I moved it, I did see some trails of less pigmentation, maybe because the water on the inside has no blue in it. Not 100% sure, but I'm going to turn off the heat and leave these to cool completely in our dye bath. And it's the next morning, and honestly, there's a tiny bit of blue left in the water. I don't think it would really show up with a spoon. Maybe you can see a little bit in the cup. It's basically clear. We definitely have crashing around the edge, but all things considered, let's take these out. We're gonna squeeze them out a bit, and then go unravel them. But the little variation that I can see on here already has me so excited. Here they are out of the water. The bottom side of this one is a very deep purple, not black, it's definitely purple. This one has a little bit of a lighter spot at the bottom. Oh, I'm so excited. It's the moment of truth. Let's start. Oh, look at that bright blue. I'm not sure if it's really coming out, oh my God, as bright blue on camera. But this is incredible and almost indescribable. Oh my gosh, you guys, look at this. Okay, so the blank has the really deep purple that's almost a navy. We've got some more sort of true, like purple, almost like a navy purple, and then this deep bright blue. And it sort of cycles through that. But there's more of the blue over here, and the darker patches get longer because the ball got bigger. But we got color penetration through to the center. And in some places, oh goodness, I can even tell a little bit that when we unravel this, there'll be some really cool, maybe speckling from just the stitch definition. I'd love to roll it inside out completely to take a look at it, but I don't really want to do that while it's wet. So I'm gonna set this aside so that way we can go wash it, and let's take a look at the next one. We will let them dry completely before we unravel them, so. Talia, I am so excited, so excited. So that was the loose one that I did on the Loops and Threads machine, and here, oh my, look how dramatic that is. This one is the one I did on the Singer knitting machine, and oh, okay, this might be the cool one, but look at that, like modeling there. Oh my goodness. I cannot believe that we got such great color penetration all the way through. This is absolutely amazing. Talia, I don't think this would have ever occurred to me. So thank you so much for coming to me and giving me this idea and making the suggestion and sponsoring this video. I cannot believe it. I already know this is going to be a long video, but some of this areas where I can just tell already we're going to see speckling in here and then in there just because of the clear resist. Oh, this is great. I do have to say, it's possible we could have had more color penetration on the Singer knitting machine blank, the tightly wound blank, if the looser one wasn't there. Clearly between the two, this one absorbed a lot more dye. This coloration is a lot more intense than this one. This one definitely has way more of a, this one will have way more of a striped gradient feel. But man, this is amazing. It is pretty nice to wash blanks versus yarn because you know things aren't going to get super tangled. Of course, things might be super untangled when I go to unravel these, but hopefully things aren't too twisted. I do notice a slight amount of that light blue color bleeding. I just added some clear dish soap. I'm not surprised by it because there was a tiny bit of blue left in the pan, but overall, this is not an amount of bleeding that would concern me greatly for any project. Like, you really have to look closely to tell that there's color there, and I'm not seeing the color that we have in these blanks diminishing at all. So I'm going to go ahead and wash them a few more times, hang them up to dry, and then let's come take a closer look. Talia, this is incredible. These blanks definitely go together. There is something that is absolutely a relationship between the two. But the differences that we see here from having the looser wound donut and the tighter wound donut is pretty striking. More of the color was able to get to the center of our looser donut that we wound on the Loops and Threads knitting machine. And so while we do see some changes from wrapping it up, you know, you see these lighter patches that slowly get further and further apart, we've got a really deep saturated color. There are reds in there, but it almost feels navy to me. It doesn't feel black, but these blues are really deep. And I think this is only happens because of the reds that are there. Blue number one on its own is fairly bright. And I just think it's great. The smaller, or I guess the narrower blank that we did on the Singer knitting machine, has a lot more of a pale blue. And then again, these dark patches start getting closer together and a little wider as we approach, you know, go from the inside up there to the outside of this blank. This one is a much more dramatic gradient, but it's still just all so exciting to me. I think this is a great example of people who ask, is it worth it to wind your own blank or to go buy one that's commercially available? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is worth it. This is something that I find really easy to do while I'm watching TV. Yeah, sometimes mistakes happen because I'm not looking at the machine, I'm looking at the screen. But since you're going to unravel it anyway, you're not going to be able to really notice where those mistakes were once the yarn is unraveled. Speaking of unraveling, that's what I'm about to go do because I want to see what these look like. But, oh, Talia, this was such a great idea and I cannot believe this never occurred to me. This is not a drill. These unraveled blanks are absolutely amazing. It is so hard for me to not go and post these to Instagram right now because this is stunning. These blanks are just unbelievable. The patterns that we see when we unravel these blanks are very similar to what we expected. But you can really see, especially on the tightly wound blank, how there's more light at one end, more dark at the other. The dark slowly decreases, the light slowly increases. That same sort of pattern is here on the looser wound blank, and this is the one from the Loops and Threads knitting machine versus the Singer knitting machine. But the overall effect is much more subtle. Again, you see increasing dark, decreasing light, but these 50-gram balls are matched. So if you're doing socks or a symmetrical shawl or whatever it is you want to do, you're going to get that same progression through the colors, which is why it's worth the effort of making these blanks. I do have a video on the channel where I showed how to make a double-stranded blank holding both ends of a yarn cake together at the same time. That resulted in there being a fair amount of extra twist in the yarn. So I do actually recommend having two separate yarn cakes when you're doing this. There will still be some twist between the yarn, and so it's a tad bit harder to unravel than, say, a commercial blank. But I definitely feel like I could have unraveled these on my skein winder versus having to do it by hand. But I wanted to do it by hand because I really wanted to sort of get a sense of this progression. So why did this work so well? There's another cake dyeing video I did a long time ago where we got a lot of color on the outside and very little towards the inside. I think one of the key things here, well, I think there's two really key things. One is that we had a lot of blue food coloring, which takes longer to bind and therefore can penetrate further. We did smush the blanks, but I think that the biggest thing is that we started with no acid in our dye pot. I haven't checked the pH of my tap water in a while, so it might technically run slightly acidic, but ultimately, it's certainly not acidic enough for all of the color to bind, and since things weren't striking immediately on the outside, it gave us time to penetrate the interior and get this beautiful effect with these reverse speckles. Even though we had a fair amount of red in here, these don't feel that purple. Sometimes purples are hard to show up on white balance, and so sometimes there's comments on how things don't look like the color I'm describing, which is why I try to describe what the colors look like. If you go close, you can really feel that red, but from further away, it does feel more navy than purple. But just look at that. This looks like stars in the sky or some kind of galaxy print. This is going to look amazing knit up. This one makes me think more of like a snowy mountain or something, or like sky and dark water and something. I don't know. But I just love the different sized stripes that this one has. Can you believe that these were dyed in one pot? I just popped these skeins off of the Nitty Knotties, and all that is left to do is to soak these for maybe 10 minutes or so in some plain tap water to help relax this crimp that we got from unraveling. And so once you get it nice and saturated, you can just give it like a nice little snap and hang it up to dry, and that will relax that crimp, making it more manageable and less likely to get tangled. Talia Rivera, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode and suggesting this brilliant idea. I know that this is not the last time that I'm going to play around with homemade sock blank donuts, and I am just so excited to explore this more in the future. There are many techniques that you can do with homemade sock blanks that you can do with the commercial sock blanks, but this is something that really is unique about the homemade blank because it's a tube and therefore you can fold it up like this. If you were to roll up a commercial sock blank, since it's flat, you could still get some cool effects, but both ends would have some deeper color. And so it's just a whole other experience, but still something that would be really cool to explore. If you would like to learn more about any of the materials that I use for this video, from the pan to the dye to the yarn, you can find some affiliate links in the video description. If you would like to learn more about sponsoring an episode of Dyepot Weekly, check out the listing in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy store. You will get 100 grams of yarn that I dye in the video, and you get to pick the yarn base, multiple shout outs in the video itself, and I'm designing a video with you in mind, so it's just a whole lot of fun. You can find a link to the listing in the video description and iCard. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, tap that bell icon to turn on notifications, and let me know what you think about this project in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.